Thank you for coming to this new chapter of this webinar series that IE University School of Architecture and Design is co-hosting with the Counselors of Real Estate. Issues such as the shift to remote working and its social impact, the need for affordable housing, the ESG factors, the economic and the environmental conditions in cities are now more relevant than ever, and have already shaken up the industry as we know it, and all require new skills and knowledge that go beyond the reach of the traditional real estate curriculum. At IE School of Architecture and Design, we have designed a master in real estate development delivered in full-time or part-time format that provides students with the flexibility to study a customizable program that adapts to students' own needs, whether that means studying face-to-face or online. With this program, students may stay on the latest trends, apply innovative digital tools, and have a sustainable and holistic understanding of current real estate issues, and become a strong, inspiring leaders ready to make an impact on modern cities. As part of a continuous learning, and with the objective to go deeper in the hot topic in the real estate industry, we partner with the counselors of real estate to give members and IE community the opportunity to understand these issues. Thank you and welcome again.
Thank you, Francesco. Hello, everyone. On behalf of the Councils of Real Estate, it is a distinct privilege to welcome you to this session of What's Next for Real Estate and the Life Experience, ESG, Changing the Narrative on Investment. Thank you for joining us. I'm Bill McCarthy, CRE, Global Chair of the Councils of Real Estate and President of WPJ McCarthy & Company in Burnaby, British Columbia, Canada. The Councils of Real Estate is a distinguished international group of accomplished leaders solving world's real estate challenges. Experienced, innovative, and credentialed problem solvers, counselors reside in 21 countries and practice in many more. We offer expertise in over 60 real estate disciplines across all asset classes. Each has earned the distinguished CRE designation. We're honored once again to be partnering with IE University of Architecture and Design on today's webinar. All topics to date emanate from the Council's 2022-23 Top 10 Issues Affecting Real Estate. I'd like to recognize our What's Next sponsors for the webinar series: Atlas Group, Busak Real Estate, Equus Capital Partners, Avison Young, and Colliers International. Thank you very much for your support. You're encouraged to utilize the Q&A feature should you wish to submit a question. Your participation is welcomed, and we'll answer as many questions as time allows. Before I begin, I'd like to offer you a free subscription to the Councilor's peer-reviewed professional journal, Real Estate Issues. If you don't already subscribe, please visit cre.org/REI to do so. I'm privileged to introduce today's moderator, Jeffrey Dorman, CRE, Chairman and CEO of International Real Estate, Inc. Founded in 1987, IREI is a global media firm recognized for sharing industry intelligence, knowledge, and perspectives for institutional real estate investment community. Welcome, Jeff.
Thanks, Bill. And I am honored to be joined by two dynamite panelists. We have with us Letitia Pons, who is a professor and master of real estate development programs at IE University School of Architecture and Design. Welcome, Letitia.
Welcome. Thank you.
We also are joined by Deborah Cloutier, who is the founder and president of Real Estate Tech Advisors, LLC. Welcome, Deb.
Thank you.
So before we get into the questions, the topics, perhaps each of you could just give a brief synopsis of what your background is that qualifies you to speak on these topics, ESG. Letitia, why don't you?
Yeah. Hello, my background, I'm an economist. I'm working on the real estate sector for the last 18 years, although before I have a financial background. And I'm working for Union Investment, which is a real estate fund, a core investor based in Germany, but internationally invested worldwide. and I'm passionate for this, for being here today speaking about ESG, because we have been dedicated many resources all over these years in all our portfolios. Thank you.
Thank you, Letitia. And Deb, your background?
Hello, thanks for having me today. So as you said, Jeffrey, I'm president and founder of Retech Advisors, and I've spent the entirety of my career focused on this intersection of sustainability and the built environment. And I am leading one of the largest consulting firms in North America, focused exclusively on helping organizations decarbonize their portfolio. Currently, we're working with a little over $1.5 trillion of assets under management for institutional owners and investors. And I'm also the Chief Sustainability Officer of Legions, which is an energy transition accelerator, an organization focused exclusively on transitioning to a low carbon economy, which is owned by Blackstone. So we've been working on these issues for a long time, and I'm excited to talk about it today.
Well, it's great to have both of you here. Obviously, this is not just a bunch of people talking about something they know something about. You guys really are experts on your particular topic. And as we all know, there's a big difference between how different countries are approaching this. In Europe, it's more of a mandated issue in terms of people being required to meet certain items. It's almost become hygiene. It's more important that you don't have ESG. It's almost excludes you from participating. In America, the adoption has been a little bit slower. So first question I would have, and I'll pose this to you there, would be, what trends are you seeing in the commercial real estate marketplace that are driving the adoption of considerations of ESG?
Well, I think there's a growing acceptance among CEOs on the effects of climate change. And behind that, there are probably many, but at least 4 mega trends that I see that are all interrelated. The first being the COVID pandemic and the obvious concerns about health and wellness, with the follow-on effects of the office workplace, new occupant expectations, and new social norms. I think the second really is the climate reality, and it's the growing recognition that we are experiencing the impacts of climate change on a more frequent and severe basis. And think about the link to the economic cost of weather-related events, which globally now are resulting in hundreds of billions of dollars of insured losses annually. And then third, I think of the generational change, the fact that there are trillions of dollars of wealth transferring from the baby boomers to the younger cohorts. And those groups are wanting their investment decisions to align with their personal belief system, which is often now being made by millennials, women, and other groups. And then I think lastly, it's around technology disruption. After 200 years of using fossil fuels, we're at a turning point in our global energy system, and fossil fuels are getting less attractive and more costly every day as investment opportunities in renewables and energy efficiency become more and more attractive. So as private capital continues to flow in at a rate that we have never seen before, climate's become a major focus for investors.
Letitia, in the early days of the emergence and awareness of ESG, people were, particularly in the United States, were kind of reluctant to adopt it because they're fiduciaries, and their first priority is making sure they're delivering good performance for their investors. Is there any evidence to suggest that using or adopting ESG policies is going to lead to better performance?
It's a very good question. It's just the question that we are just having in mind for the last 15 years. And I'm going to tell an anecdote. No, when me as asset manager, I was proposing to our investment committees measurements, sustainable measurements to improve our portfolio. They were always saying, who is paying for that measurement? Who is going to have the benefit? Is paying the landlord, the benefit is for the tenant. Okay, then let's don't do it. And now that switch is completely changed over the last years. No, there is a switch, and in our company for the last 10 years we have been investing on this, creating our own tools, our own measurements, and being very cautious about the importance of starting the decarbonization process. No, 12 years ago, and informing our tenants about the relevance of these aspects that we were performing, that they were the principal beneficiary of these measurements, even if we were paying for that. That when you ask for more global, if it's profitable or not, and I can maybe later better develop, but if you are just thinking on a short-term perspective, maybe not, maybe is more efficient for a performance perspective just to focus on another aspects that they are going to produce a better performance to your portfolio. But if you just start thinking on the medium long term, and we as core investor, we are having in mind our portfolio with long-term vision, because we are long-term holders. Of course, we see a profit. And the profit came from many different aspects, like access to financing, like tenant appreciation, and all aspects that we can develop later on deep.
So there's a question for you, Leticia, from Margarita Cicciani. And she says, do you think, or perhaps another way of rephrasing it, how important is the decarbonization of the real estate portfolio of various investment companies right now?
Now, for us, it's our priority, and I can say it is very proud because it's just real. We are not going to invest in our, and we invest last year, 2021, we invest 8 billion on all type of asset class, and any one of our new investments is going to be performed or approved by our investment committee if it's not fulfilling with the taxonomy European criteria. And there we are very restricted, and we can further develop also. But the question is very clear. For us, it's top priority.
Right. And you also answered the second part, which is, how does that impact your investments, which is great. So, Deb, what kind of pressures are investors placing on your clients to adopt these ESG policies, and how has that changed over time? Are they feeling more pressure today than they were, say, 2 or 3 years ago?
Yes, I would say so. So we work with over 100 portfolios or clients that own multiple funds. So these are tens of thousands of assets. And I would say the pressures I could sum up in one word, which is risk. Asset managers and investors are facing huge pressure from new and more acutely defined climate-related risks. So those being physical risks, things that occur like flooding or acute heat, right, and availability of water, the risk of stranded assets, so that you may have value at risk in a market or in a fund of assets that potentially may not have a prospective buyer in the future, or are going to require additional massive amounts of capital in order to upgrade them, or the regulations associated with where those buildings are located now. They have performance standards in many jurisdictions. And so if your building doesn't meet a minimum threshold of environmental performance associated with emissions, they may be facing very large fines. And then the last risk I would say is really around social and brand risk. And this sort of a thing that is happening in the marketplace today, which is a shift in expectations of investors. So now when our clients are going to do a raise of capital to start a new fund, they simply can't not have an ESG story. They have to have a strategy, and it's different than it was even a couple of years ago, where it was like, it was nice that you could talk about your strategy and we have these goals and we're going to do these things in the future. But now it is becoming much more of an issue of time, where it's bringing frontal. There are requirements, as Leticia pointed out, with sustainable finance disclosure regulation. Like if you're saying you have a fund that has a green attribute or is going to, benefit the planet somehow, You now have to back that up with actual statements and evidence, and you have ongoing reporting and compliance. And so I think that this is driving, really the big drivers are regulation and the associated compliance. And then the fact that the capital markets have entered the dialogue in a way that they have not been so involved previously. So I think those are some of the things we're seeing. Our clients are feeling new pressures. And as Letitia said perfectly, like they have to make it a top priority now, and it has to be integrated into their day-to-day business.
Mm.
So question for both of you, I'll let Letitia go first. What do best practices in E and S and G look like today? What would be some examples? I realize we could probably talk to
Yeah, because E is very easy because we have been focusing on that for the last, I was mentioning, 10 years. G is also something that all our companies have in mind also. But S, I think that's the main focus now in our company. We are speaking about diversity and some aspects that were not discussed before, and also access to the living, which is lack of demand, and these concerns are just now being more speak. But that's true that the push for us is also our investors. Is as Deb was mentioning, we are pushed by our investors. And that's good push for us, because we are trendsetters. We are just in the front line, and we are the first and the starters applying all these aspects, because our assets need to fulfill with all of that. So I say, yeah, E, I will say it is easy because we have been first world certifications. Now is because it's regulation taxonomy with different names, but always focus that. Social, because mental health, diversity, they are just the words that we are. We have a new CEO, and just the main role is just to discuss these topics. In the last meetings was one of the main concerns, and governance. That's also a little bit linked with all of them. No, to Deborah is chief of sustainability. These kind of things that are very new for the companies now. No, on the terms of governance, equal board members, and on diverse board members. Now we have a Gen board member, so our new generations in the company of trainees have an access to the boards. So yeah, we are acting in all the letters, I will say.
So Deb, same question. Best practices in the ESG area from your perspective.
Yeah, I mean, adding to what Letitia said, our clients are spending a lot of time and focus on measurement and verification. The old adage, you can't manage what you don't measure, rings true in ESG. We are a data-rich sector for sure. And you need to conduct a greenhouse gas inventory. You need to understand your emissions footprint so that then you can prioritize and identify those areas of opportunity to reduce that footprint that are material. And I think the next thing is really that helps you, right, set a baseline and benchmark your performance, and then you need to assess opportunities for improvement. And that's where I think the E is a little easier, as Letitia said, because there's a lot more standards around it. There's an understanding of the connection of energy, water, and waste, and how you can lay out a capital plan to reduce those over a period of time, especially these deep energy retrofits that are going to be required to start to make progress towards net zero goals. But you also have to assess the portfolio for renewables, right? Is there opportunity for on-site or community solar? And then we're seeing one of the largest best practices with the biggest return on investment from a financial standpoint is putting in place a centralized national power procurement strategy that incorporates green power. That's one of the fastest ways to start to reduce your footprint. And then more on the social and the governance, I would say, is really that engagement, that dialogue that is starting to take place with the occupants, the residents, and the tenants, and understanding how your you're helping them to do their part, right? In most of our real estate, 80% or more of the consumption is driven by those that are living and working in these buildings. And so we're not going to solve this problem as owners or landlords. We have to engage that group of constituencies. And then I would say that often leads to green leasing language and things of that nature. And probably lastly on the governance, I mean, most organizations today have pretty good governance, especially if they're publicly traded entities. But, you know, putting in explicit things around responsible contractor policies, negative screening for investments, new data elements to collect and analyze when you're in your debt side. It's not just all about the equity, right? So I think we're starting to see a collection of best practices that honestly companies don't have to do this for the first time. They don't have to do it on their own. There's tons of replicable solutions that you can learn from others and put into practice.
So an audience question has come in from Michael Slaroff. He says, Deb, you produced an extraordinary paper in 2019 on the insufficiency of capital in the property insurance industry to underwrite climate risk. What are the short-term prospects for the health of that industry, given the acceleration of climate deterioration in places like Florida?
Well, that's a whole session right on that topic. I mean, we were seeing several years ago, 40% increases in insurance premium costs for our clients globally. This set them back on their heels and took note in a very different way. And engaging with the reinsurance industry like Munich Re and others who have now really aggressively adopted changes to their methodology, to their models, to do future scenario analysis and incorporating that into pricing. And it's not just the pricing, it's the coverage. We're now seeing larger, higher deductibles. Certain things are not being covered, as well as just, I think we're going to go back to straight up availability of insurance. I mean, think back to Florida after Hurricane Andrew. Was that the late 70s? Anyway, basically, Florida became a self-insurance market. All the insurance carriers left it. And I've wondered for quite some time, like since the big fires here in the United States, we had massive fires in our Western states and sort of territory. And I'm not really sure that the insurance companies are going to come back in the same way for the residential market, which is going to just further exacerbate housing prices, right? And the ability of who's that prospective next buyer for a property that has to be totally self-insured. I think it's an issue that hopefully smarter people than me are going to try and work out and figure out how this is going to happen. But I think that this is a colossal issue that is being wrestled with right now in the industry. And there are no immediate easy answers because we're rebuilding in those same areas that continually experience these weather-related events. But we have seen some jurisdictions simply say, you can't rebuild here. So, there's going to be some winners and losers when the music stops, if you will.
Yeah. Now, Letitia brought up the issue of diversity, equity, inclusion, which is getting a lot of talk these days amongst institutional investors all around the globe. And I think it's pretty clear to most people what diversity looks like in terms of best practices. But I think there's some confusion over what the equity and inclusion, the E&I, really are all about. And so what does best practices, and first of all, what do we mean when we talk about equity, right? And what do we mean when we talk about inclusion? And what does best practices look like there? I'll let you both kind of comment on that. Letitia, you want to go?
I think best practice, we are doing so badly in Europe that the European Union is somehow enforcing the companies and to fulfill with this inclusion, diversity. So we are not doing well. that's very sad to say, but we are not performing well, and that's And that's a big debate, no, about quotas, no quotas, how this will be enforced, sanctions, no sanctions, and that will be that's an interesting debate, because at the end it's not an inclusion, because if you force with and coerce to take the decisions, then it's not natural, and this is not inclusive, or could be discriminating. So it's just kind of a circle that is difficult to get out. What I'm seeing in my company in terms of diversity, what really helps us to improve is to benchmark. So even before we are forced, so just to benchmark what our competitors are doing is the best way for us to improve, and the best push for us to do improvements on that areas, mainly in diversity. We engage and study, and we have the picture about us, how we look like on terms of diversity, and that pop up of the alarms. So that make us realize that we are not doing so well maybe in diversity, and we need to work on that. And that's why our CEO is so committed with these issues, no? So at the end, it's just benchmark and being pushed by competitors, which is for me working better. Also the investors that I mentioned before with sustainability, the push for the investors. But yeah, I think it's just benchmark and compare. I don't know. There was
Yeah, I mean, I think the problem is, or the situation we find ourselves in today is, there are no standards that define what good, better, and best looks like from a diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging perspective. But we kind of have a sense of what doesn't look good. And so I think, to Letitia's point, we're taking stock. Organizations are doing some evaluation and assessment and asking questions they've never asked before. Like, how many women work here? What's our LGBTQ plus community? How does that compare? How do we pay people? How are they compensated? And is there equity there? So I think it has a lot of meanings for different organizations, and they're defining their own narrative. But I think that there are some basic items that you should understand and assess. And then, as you said, Letitia, peer compare and decide, well, is that what we want to look like or not? And a lot of that comes down to leadership, and it's coming down to a board or an executive leadership position to say, we are perhaps not comfortable exactly where we are today, and here's a plan on how some goals that we're setting or some actions we're going to take. So I think it's being very self-defined, but some of the frameworks are also giving us guidance, like the GRES, the Global Real Estate Sustainability Benchmark. I mean, there's this alphabet soup of frameworks that are out there right now. So there are indicators and some guideposts that we can use to follow and assess where we are today and where we want to be. But I'm seeing a lot of work happening across the marketplace. Like, for example, Blackstone has an initiative called Career Pathways. They are working to try to reach into different communities that have been historically underrepresented and bring them into the conversation, do financial and investment education, and working with a program called Grads for Life, because not everyone is, got a 4-year degree or an advanced degree, but they have so much to offer in the workplace, and we need to help, just find good, like more diverse thought at the table to help advance all of the conversations, regardless of whether it's ESG related or not.
I'd like to come back to a definition issue again, which is equality, right? Or equity. What do we mean by equity? Do we mean shared ownership? Do we mean equality of opportunity? What do they mean when they're talking about DEI and they're talking about equity?
Well, I mean, I think it has, again, it depends on the use of it. If you're talking about affordable housing, equity has a very different definition. It's the access to housing that is not such an untenable portion of an individual or family's income, and the ability to have good, clean housing that is safe that you have access to services and education, right, for your family. It means that you don't have an undue burden to have to travel in order to get to work, both from time and cost perspective. So I do think it depends on which part of the societal issue that you're talking about, but I believe that it is about helping to bring others along that have perhaps not been part of the conversation before. And even, you know, the mortgage industry in the United States, we have a bad history that we're trying to rewrite relative to where we're issuing loans for home ownership. And that materially drives the outcomes of the individuals that live in the communities.
And Letitia, as an educator and as an asset owner, how are you from Europe viewing the issue of equity? What does it mean to you? And what steps are you taking on the asset management side of your business to foster greater equity in your organization?
It's a very difficult question. As educator, and I think that iUniversities is promoting a lot. We can speak here about equity of gender, for example. Just to improve the presence of women and also president of a woman real estate organization, just to improve the presence of women, we are giving the scholarships, or we are supporting. And that's, for example, in terms of equity on gender, no? For example, or access on education with the scholarships to the favorized person. On terms of another asset class like hotels, retail, that's quite difficult to think about this equity. I agree with Deborah, investing in affordable housing and social housing. That's a path that we can, as real estate, contribute to a better world on that. And also, I think a contribution could be also, and that's a debate, no? We are very focused on construction, but our city centers in Europe are we're getting empty, and now another way of contribute our real estate sector is just for refurbishing our city centers, our office buildings, our hotels, our portfolios, and not creating more, but just improving what is existing and to make our cities more easy to live in for the employees. Same in our buildings. We are creating actions, mental health support, physical activities, but that's true that equity in terms of there are so many aspects for equity in sustainability. For example, equity, I will say we are a clear commitment to have a net zero carbon footprint even early than is compulsory by the European Union. So we have been collecting over the last 10 years data, which is the easy way to have the picture, the real picture, and we have been investing millions on improving and to be able to fulfill with the dates. So several aspects is so broad, the ESG concept, but I think it was very easy, as I mentioned at the beginning, the environmental and it's most difficult the social. And then because I was speaking a little bit before, but if you place quota, it could be somehow also discrimination, but there is a lot of work to be done there. We are not a good example. We don't have board members, women board members, and the majority of our directors in the company, they are men. So the company is working very hard to improve that. And in some countries, it's not so easy because ourselves, we just step back in our career. So it's not just a question of being forced for having us on the boards. It's just a question of finding the right people, no? So that's why quotas is coercive, but maybe it's not the best way. Who knows?
Well, you know, you mentioned retrofit, and For every new development, particularly in Europe, where there isn't as much development relative to existing stock, for every new development, there's probably thousands of existing buildings. It's pretty obvious when you look at new development that there are things you can do to engineer into the structure of a new project, sustainable type attributes. A little bit different on the existing, where it's oftentimes very expensive to properly retrofit and upgrade the energy usage of those properties. What can be done that has been proven to be profitable in existing properties as opposed to new developed properties?
I can put an example very easy. A very easy example. For example, in one of our buildings in Barcelona, we need to replace the air conditioning system. No, so the investment is, let's say, 600,000 euros. But there is another possibility, which is very sustainable, which is connect to the cool and heat district system of Barcelona. So you can connect your building to the cooling and heating system of the city called District Lima. That's 2.5 million. That 3 or 5 years ago, maybe my company, they will thought that's very expensive. Let's go for a cheaper solution. Okay, we will choose the most sustainable air conditioning equipment, but let's go for that one. Now, our company is taking the decision about connecting to that district system, because we really, it's not like words, we are just committed. So we prefer to, and you said it's more sustainable, it's profitable. We think in the long term, as you were mentioning, and Dave was mentioning, the asset will be more liquid, the tenants will have a say, so they will prefer those buildings, and they will be more easy to finance. So I think it's not a very short term, and not very easy to see the profit in the short term, but we see, and as long-term investor, we clearly see the benefit on that measurements.
Deb, same question for your clients around the globe. What are they doing for the built environment as opposed to the new development? And what's working?
Yeah, I mean, right? Over 80% of all the buildings already exist today that are going to be here for the next 30, possibly 50 years. So it's really an issue of major renovations from a lot of our clients' perspective. And I think that the answer varies based on whether or not you're a long-term holder, like in a core plus portfolio, your internal rate of return or your hurdle rate is different if you're in a value add fund and you're trying to exit the asset in like 2 or 3 years. But as we have more of these deep retrofits being performed, where you are analyzing a given building systems and its geography, and you're seeing what is the most technically, available opportunities, like we can get 50% plus out of buildings pretty easily. And it really is about what's your expected return on it. And if you're now looking at pricing in other things, like I might have to pay fines in the future of $1 million. So maybe I'm going to use that $1 million today, which I would not 5 years ago have even dreamed that I was willing to speak of investing that much in building system upgrades, right? So it kind of changes the dynamic. I am going to get to your question, but my whole point is the construct by which you're making decisions has fundamentally changed. And there are like the Empire Building Challenge is happening in New York City right now, which is a competition of tall buildings trying to figure out how to deeply retrofit them. We are going to learn many lessons from those types of initiatives, and looking at, the ways that, as Letitia said, real estate's about those trigger points, those transactional moments when you have a large building energy using system in a building that needs to be replaced, rather than waiting until it's at the end of its useful life. Now you want to look at what your options are and plan for that replacement of something that is highly more energy efficient than the current system. And you look at possibly doing that replacement before the end of its useful life, right? This is where it starts to get a lot more creative, and the way that you finance it, because a lot of the technologies still need to be developed, but many are already here today. you've got your lighting, you've got your major energy using systems in your HVAC. And if certainly you're doing like a repositioning of a building, you can really just tear out the guts of that heating and cooling and lighting system and replace it with, systems today that are far, far more efficient. I mean, most heating, like individual air conditioning units, like rooftop units that you would have on a strip center or a mall environment, they're 50+% more efficient than they were even 5-10 years ago. I mean, these systems are there. And then when you couple it with some of the real-time metering and diagnostics of the building automation systems, you can squeeze out so much unnecessary wasted energy usage and in many cases water. So I think it's more of a capital planning exercise and an assessment conundrum, if you will, than, is there the right new technology? It's not one simple technology because all these buildings are built of different vintages and types and building systems. So you just need to, have a planning exercise to assess what those opportunities are and then start to put the capital to work.
Now, are tenants now demanding this more, or are they somewhat agnostic about it?
I think it depends is the answer. The large global multinational companies that are tenants have pressure on them from their shareholders and investors to have these same goals, to reduce their environmental footprint, to be a good corporate citizen, right? And so those tenants are actively asking for and engaging landlords. It is happening much more so in central business districts, major metropolitan statistical areas, the tertiary cities and locations. I'm still not seeing the tenants, knocking on the landlord's door saying, I need to have more efficient lighting in here. But the more sophisticated landlords, the institutional owners, are doing this as standard course and are differentiating and marketing their buildings as such, as a way to attract and retain those, prestigious like tenants that they want to have in it. But I don't think we're completely there yet, at least not in America, for sure.
No,
Okay, we're starting to get
so-
one second, Letitia, I'll let you go. We're starting to get a lot of questions coming in. We've got 4 waiting in queue. We're going to move into Q&A mode in just a few minutes. Go ahead, Letitia.
No, I just want to mention that I fully agree. Tenants are becoming more sophisticated. I have the experience this week that still with a crisis or mood crisis approaching, still tenants are focused on cost. And maybe I understand that opportunistic or value add, they are not so focused on sustainability because they can obtain a performance now by not doing this now and doing just at the moment of the disposal of the assets. So it's a question also of making numbers and different type of investor strategies.
Okay. Now, as awareness of climate change related issues becomes globally widespread, there's got to be more political pressure being placed on legislators and regulators. Do you see the regulatory environment strengthening regs around these issues moving forward? Are you seeing it now?
I'm happy to jump in on that. From my perspective, I would say the answer is yes. The SEC in the United States is evaluating a pretty wide sweeping set of new regulation for publicly traded companies that would require material impacts of climate change to be incorporated into reporting. And I think that we are seeing many organizations from a voluntary standpoint, right, adopting things like the Carbon Disclosure Project, which I think half the global market cap now has adopted this rigorous climate-related disclosure standard, which was developed by the International Sustainability Standard Board. So I think we're seeing a combination of regulation and sort of this sweeping trend of organizations recognizing climate risk as just that, a risk that needs to be identified and mitigated. Also, we're just with, as we mentioned before, sustainable finance disclosure reporting throughout the EU, and local jurisdictional requirements are coming into play all over the globe right now. So, but political still is a little, still mixed bag here in the United States. Not everybody's on board yet.
Okay, Letitia, anything to add to that?
In Europe, European Union just published these taxonomy rules, and I think for us it's clear we will need to fulfill. One thing is how they are going to enforce this, and just to, because one thing is the ideas, and then how that ideas are transposed and how they are going to be penalized and put in place in each country. But that's for sure that there will be in a future. For example, with an energy performing rate, which is your more equivalent to your energy star, if you don't have a certain letter, you are not going to be able to transact the asset. So that's really coercive. So it's just, I cannot sell my asset. So it's going to be, and that's my concern. It's also for organizations like us, that's going to be easy, not easy, expensive, but we can perform that. But for the private individuals, like an old lady owning an apartment, which is not having the resource to invest, how that's going to happen, no? And then I think the local governments, regional governments, and European Union, they will need to support, and there are public funds for that already, but needs to be better organized how that reach to the people.
Okay, it's time to move into Q&A. So encourage the audience to pose their questions. We already have 4 in queue, and I'll pose them to you as we go along. And please, please, please ask your questions now. You've got a really expert panel. This is an opportunity to pick their brains and make sure that the reason you devoted an hour to watching in, to make sure you get your questions answered, okay? So the first question is from Britt Fox, and he says, she says, are there any industry orgs in the HR inclusion space that might be hubs for standard creation for equity inclusion, similar to the U.S. Green Building Council, creating the leadership in energy and environmental design firm?
I know the word about that. I'm very sorry. I know the word. Maybe well will be considering this certification well, or will be considering some of these aspects. Is the only I can think now, which is really in the industry, at least in Europe, very implemented now in our buildings and assets well certification, which is considering also areas for exercise, quality food. Maybe that could be one.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think I'm starting to see some of the large HR organizations like SHRM, forgive me for not recalling at this exact moment what that stands for, but it's basically an association of HR professionals. And you're seeing a lot more conversation and training for HR folks around unconscious bias, ways to be more equitable in your recruitment practices, right? More sensitive to things. Like a lot of folks now, many companies, you don't see someone's name on their resume, or there's a movement that I recently heard of where some organizations are thinking about not looking at their degrees or credentials. I mean, that's a pretty bold new step, perhaps. So I do think the HR industry is grappling with and trying to bring these concepts into practice, but I think there's more work to be done.
Yeah, I may be wrong, but I think GRESB is also working on creating some DEI indicators.
They do have that. You're right. GRESB does as well.
And I know that PRIA just launched, and I think also NREV and NREV have ESG awards to kind of recognize leadership in that area. So these are some ways that these things are starting to come about, so you can pay attention to those. However, given that there isn't an organization that's actually doing this work, might be an opportunity for some of the CREs out there to take a look at maybe being a leader and stepping up and making something happen. We have another question from an anonymous attendee. The real estate developers and investors could be city makers and city changers with their decisions about how to develop assets in the city. Must they do some public-private collaboration with the public authorities of the city to make that happen?
Yeah, sure. At least, for example, in Madrid, we have Plan Vive. I mean, there is collaboration. The collaboration should be should improve, of course. That's a high demand for developers, investors. But yeah, there is collaboration just to provide housing. In Madrid, we have this Plan Vive that consists about town hall providing plot of land with a different price just for develop social housing, for example, and affordable housing. So yes, I think there is collaboration on improving the city and also infrastructures. When you are, for example, now we have a big project in Madrid Nuevo Norte. So yeah, there is collaboration, but of course, collaboration is always needed and should always improve because we have the resources. And sometimes the main restrictions are legislation, permits, license, all these. So we are always fighting for improvements on that because we have the resources, but sometimes it's not so easy, like change of use in the city centers, for example, and all these aspects that they are really important to improve the cities, as I'm mentioning, just for doing refurbishment in the cities. And we have here in Europe, a lot of buildings are protected. So, and sometimes it's quite difficult to do a refurbishment. So yeah, collaboration will be needed and it's possible. And I think it's the future, no? Improve this collaboration.
Yeah, the only thing I would also add to that is a thought around some of the influx of public funding that's taking place. That's going to be related to both infrastructure, which gets into urban planning and community development, and some of these public-private partnerships. So here in the United States, we just passed the single largest of our generation bill called the U.S. Inflation Reduction Act. It puts aside $800 billion to fund climate-related solutions. And this is going to have a lot of effects that I think are, the rulemaking is still taking place. There's over 150 different program offices being set up throughout the US government. A lot of that money is going to flow down to the states and the local jurisdictions. And a lot of it is going to spur public and private fund matching for some of these improvements, many of which are going to be infrastructure related, which I think are going to have some pretty cool and pretty revolutionary improvements in place.
Right. So Britt Fox has a question. He says, I'm an MAI appraiser. And while leadership within the appraisal institute really is interested in addressing redlining and other discriminatory housing and mortgage policies of the past with observable, persistent financial impacts decades after the policies were outlined. However, the general appraisal populace is quite against updating standards or considering potential ways the appraisal practice can quantify or address the financial impacts of discrimination in the past. The organization is overwhelmingly white, male, and a few years away from retirement. Are there any industry organizations with best practices or case studies that transition or consider equity inclusion practices? Similar to the question you asked earlier. And is recruitment of a more diverse base of practitioners typically seen as the best way to improve equity inclusion within the industry organizations and policies?
I mean, I'm not an MAI, I'm not an appraiser. So, but I have tried to work with the organization for several years on bringing into the practice considerations of energy efficiency and its potential impacts on the valuation of the property. And I will say, it's a fairly slow moving organization in terms of change and adoption. I know even within the counselors, we're looking at a similar issue of an aging membership. And I do believe that having different voices from different backgrounds at the table help to advance the conversation. But that's very much a personal opinion. So I don't know, Letitia, if you have any organizations that you would look towards.
No, but I'm very in line with what you mentioned. Our main discussion is how all these huge investments we have been made on improvements on ESG has not been have not been reflected on the appraisals that we got. No, that for the improvements in our assets. For other aspects like diversity and social, I will not see this. We are, at least I think we are very far from for considering this as a positive impact when an appraisal. I think that we are still very far away.
So a question from Nina Swanson. What would each of you say is the one greatest challenge and greatest opportunity within the real estate ESG space right now?
My answer to that's very easy. Time. Time is our greatest challenge. Time to, you have so many opportunities ahead of you. How do you prioritize them? Time in terms of the climate clock is ticking and we need to take actions and have needed to take actions for a long time. And it's against you in terms of figuring out speed and scale. And so to me, time is my greatest enemy in this.
So what are you advising your clients to focus on first, given that time is a limited resource?
They have to, it's the prioritization exercise. You have to establish the baseline and understand today's performance so that you can rack and stack and prioritize what things are the best ones to focus on first. And that's why we focus on energy efficiency in buildings, doing renewable assessments, and then green power procurement, because I think that bundling, along with hopefully the greening of the grid, is going to start to move us down our consumption curves or our emission curves.
Are those priorities one size fits all, or are they uniquely tailored to each particular individual organization?
I think the strategy applies ubiquitously. I think then what that translates into specific actions could vary, right? A hotel's opportunities are probably different than a portfolio of multifamily versus, you know, a life sciences buildings. But I think the strategy holds true.
Letitia, same question.
Yeah.
Greatest challenge and greatest opportunity within the real estate ESG space?
The challenge, I will say timing, but in our case is very, very clear. The timing is 2030, so we have, and 2050. So in our internal programs and software measuring all these tools, we have very clear where we have the limits. So that's the big challenge. Also with the economical challenge about having all the resources just to be able to achieve this time frame, which is very nearby. And then the real estate opportunity, not just for us, but just in general for the sector, I think is just the refurbishment. I think we have been very focused on producing and circular, and also a challenge will be just to be more sustainable also with the circular economy. I think we need to be able just to just take advantage about what is there already in our cities and to make this better and improve that. And I know that maybe it's not a big challenge for architects thinking about amazing new towers in the cities, but I think the challenge, at least we have enough real estate stock in our countries. It's just how to use it, except if we are considering living. For living, maybe in many countries we have a scarcity, but for the rest of the asset class, we have enough. And that will be a big challenge, and for all the parties involved, project managers, construction companies, architects, experts on materials, improving the materials, improving the many things, lawyers, legislations, a lot of opportunities of work on this sector.
Okay, so we're going to have to close out the Q&A period and bring the discussion to a close because we're coming right up on the hour. If there were one thing that you wanted to leave the participants with to think about, what would it be? Letitia, why don't you go first? One thing.
I think it's just not, for me, the message will be ESG is not a question about we want is profitable. No, it's just our objective. I need to be the objective of all the world. I mean, is just this world is just one, and we want to have this world for many generations. And we see all the I experienced in my career so many earthquakes, thunderstorms, and incidents, and we need to be more resilient. So I think it's just now that we need to focus for the next generations, just to have a world, not just it's more holistic. It's not just real estate. It's just we want to have a better world for the next generations.
Deb, your final takeaway?
I guess my final takeaway is that all of this ESG business is very complicated. There are so many overwhelming pieces of information and possibilities, and well, what did they do? What should I do? I would say start small. Just make a commitment to prioritize resources to figuring out what your plan is going to be. And from there, right, kind of move forward.
Well, awesome job, both of you. And participants, thank you for participating. Bill or Francesco, do you have any closing comments that you want to make?
Thanks, Jeff. I'll take it from there. First of all, thank you so much, Letitia, Deborah, and Jeff for hosting this really, really informative session. I also want to thank Francesco and our colleagues at IE for their support. Quite an amazing job, guys. When you look at the top 10, please note that you should consider it all in tandem because everything now is so interconnected. In this year's top 10 list, I can't help but note that ESG is number 10, regulatory uncertainty number 8, energy number 5, and we go down to the labor issues. So please stay tuned. On-demand recordings are available for most of What's Next sessions, and all registrants will receive today's recording. I hope you'll join us in 2023 for a new array of compelling webinars, beginning with the January 12th for a special presentation from our stellar Economic Advisory Council. That will be fabulous. Don't miss it and look for details soon. Until then, on behalf of the Counselors of Real Estate and IE University and our panelists, thank you for attending this session of What's Next for Real Estate and the Life Experience. And we wish you all season's greetings and goodbye.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Happy holidays.
Thank you.
Bye.